Just to summarize what that paradigm shift swing looks like, you know, it is this kinetic whip. The kinetic part of the title stands for the kinetic chain, using all of the kinetic chain of the entire body to lead and power the shot, as opposed to the old paradigm, which we'll go into and said many times, is a arm-driven, arm-led kind of swing. So half of the equation is using the body instead of the arm, leading with the body instead of the arm. But the other part of this new model is really the accent on the whip component of the swing. This blazing release of energy from the rotating body up and around, you know, at a speed that's 4 or 5 times faster than the old generation, and with more consistency. Finally, what made Ruth's swing revolutionary was taking advantage of this whip component of the swing, where the body is unwinding, lower body, upper body, and then the arms following, and then the extension and release in a whip-like manner, so much faster than the older generation that had essentially no whip component at all. It was just a pushing linear action. And before I play a video clip I obtained about Ruth's swing, I converted it to a slow motion swing so you can see all this better. Before I play that, I just want to show you sort of some of the basics of the Babe Ruth swing. And again, I'm doing this right-handed, he was left-handed. So, and we'll go through this in more detail, but there was a tremendous amount of shifting back and gathering energy in Ruth's swing, and he would lift and dip this lead leg, which so many baseball players do today, even more so. And you see this sort of shifting back and pulling back in the shoulders and arms. He's gathering up this energy. And with Ruth, after he got sort of wound up back here and coiled in, he would have this tremendous unwinding, first with the lower half, with a tremendous stride forward towards the pitcher in baseball, because it's much more linear oriented. And he would be falling and sinking in this sort of recentering move that we talked about in previous lessons in tennis. Same throwing action, swinging action, always has this sinking and lowering where the pressure is driven into the ground, some momentum and lead pressure is going into the front leg. And then, of course, he would, you know, start to unwind from the lower half in a rotational manner, sequential manner, and then, you know, this tremendous follow through. Now, Ruth did not have one component that modern players do, which we have talked about in tennis, which is when modern players stride forward and they brace with this side thing, then they push back and up to generate even more torque in their body, more power. And Ruth really didn't have that. You'll see it in the video that he sort of gets out here and then he just sort of kind of lunges ahead. So he's missing that piece of power that we have in the modern player, but of course he was still fantastic in what he did. Let's take a look at Ruth's swing. This is taken in batting practice towards the end of his career, not his top form, but gives you a good view of the basic sequencing and power that we're talking about. So now we're looking at the new paradigm comparison with Ruth and tennis. And I put up photos of Jimmy Connors and John McEnroe as sort of the old paradigm. And we've talked about this several times throughout the course of the series. Again, it's nothing to demean any of their accomplishments. They're great champions. the greatest in the world at that time. But they swung the racket in quite a different manner than we're talking about. And I'll have video links in the notes so you can take a look at all this for yourself. So what are the difference between the new paradigm and the old paradigm? New paradigm of the kinetic whip and the old model of the linear stiff forehand. And basically it's all the same things that we talked about, the difference between Babe Ruth and the previous generations, the same paradigm shift in tennis. So the new generation of the big three brought in a much more body-driven swing as opposed to the arm-only swing that earlier generations in tennis had and were the dominant way of swinging. They also brought in a much more rotational understanding of the body and the swing path. Again, as opposed to the Connors and McEnroe version where the body stood very stiff and there was this sort of swinging gait action of the arm. They were very good at it, but it wasn't anything really like the modern day swing. The whole idea of being more athletic and using all parts of our body to generate power and speed, something that was brought into this new paradigm. Again, as opposed to keeping the body still and just using the arm in the old paradigm. This idea in the new paradigm that we're in a pulling motion of led and driven by the body's action. These are the big muscles, the core muscles in our body. This is the main source of power we have in all sports. It would be very strange if all the power suddenly was in our arm, one of the weaker parts of our body. No, the rotational pulling action in the right form creates a pulling action on the handle of the racket that eventually is released into the swing. Whereas the older generation from beginning to end was a pushing and levering action of the arm. That's what powered the swing. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, the new generation paradigm is really taking advantage of all this idea of the whip element in the swinging process, where the racket head is going to accelerate 4 or 5 times faster because of the angular momentum created by the rotational hand path of the player. Then the racket head swings out and accelerates around the swing curve. Quite a bit different than this sort of thing where there's the hand and the racket head are going at the same speed, 20 miles an hour. To the advantage of the new paradigm swing over the old paradigm swing, the difference really is revolutionary. The old paradigm, people swang as fast as their hand could go around their body, which was only about 20 miles an hour. But with the new kinetic whip paradigm, racket head speeds are getting up to 80, 90 miles an hour, sometimes even more. So 3 to 4 times faster at least. Now, I don't want to make this basic analogy in comparison too oversimplified. We did have players who played with topspin in past eras, some great players and some great champions. So Laver comes to mind, Borg, Wielander, Lendl, Vilas, all had topspin as a big part of their game. But they just didn't have the racket head speed to produce the power and spin that we see in the new paradigm. And in the 90s, Agassi and Sampras were dominant players. And they did have a more athletic style than previous generations, which is what we would expect as we progress. And they did have some components of whip and rotational action for sure. But it wasn't as much or as athletic or as rotational or as whip-like as the big three and the new generation. It just didn't have the racket head speed to produce the power and spin on a shot of 80 miles an hour on a ground stroke and 3,000 revolutions per minute on topspin. So, to boil it all down, the new paradigm is this extraordinary combination of spin and power, spin and speed that you can get with this kinetic whip forehand. Now, a lot of recreational players just don't believe at this point that you can swing hard and still be consistent with your swinging. But with this new paradigm swing, you can have the speed and you can have the consistency as well. And that's what this lesson and most of our series has been all about. So first in the background, again, the 3 phases: the gather, the sink and unwind, or sink and separate, and then unwind and unfurl. So the first stage is this gather stage. And again, we'll start this whole process and keeping this process in a much more athletic start to begin with. Remember, we said this whole paradigm is more athletic. It's from beginning to end, it's more athletic. Even in the ready position, we're more athletic with the weight down into our legs, the hinge, the 30-degree tilt forward, and we're ready to put something more athletic into motion. And so we have the step out and the weight shifting to our back, the coil of our hips, and sometimes we see this left leg not necessarily pick up, but we see this left leg of players sort of flex in, helping us load and coil the hips properly in the gather stage. And we talked about having a more vertical coiled lift of our arms, where we're spiraling up with our ribs and our chest and our muscles into this gathering higher position, as opposed to just letting our arms dangle on the side and dropping them to the side. We're coiling up vertically so that we can then extend our arm in the next phase out deep and behind us. So I said I wanted one word to sort of encapsulate many different concepts, so we're encapsulating many of the lessons with this gather idea. But there's also a key component of mental focus with the gather word. So we're really gathering our forces, gathering our energy to really put something into this swing. Now, we don't have to agree with everything Jimmy Connors said about tennis as war and wanting to sort of kill our opponent. But we are gathering our forces, gathering our energy to really deliver something forceful. We're out to win these points. We're out to win this match. We're out to dominate our opponents. So before we do that, we need to gather our forces, gather our energy. And so I don't see that mental focus with many recreational players. They're just playing along and they don't really get serious till the ball is coming across the net and landing on their side of the court. And they say, well, then I have to do something. That's a neutral, passive mentality that we need to get out of. We need to be hyper-focused on loading and gathering as we're getting ready to receive the shot from their opponent. And we need to move much faster in this loading and gathering, as we've talked about. So we really want to deliver something powerful back at that opponent. So we have to gather first. So once we've gathered, we're going to sink and separate, and we don't need to go into that much detail because we've gone over this many times. So there's the sinking, lowering of pressure into our legs and hips. There is the recentering from having the weight shifted back here to being recentered, torso more over our middle of our hips, with some pressure going into the front side with a bump. And we need a side bend, which helps us create that pressure. And we need the extension and separation. As our hips start to unwind, we get this stretch across our whole body. Again, that missing piece of separation that we're now talking about, that needs to be incorporated into your practice and into your swing. And then the final phase of unwinding and unfurling. So once we've got the sink and separation going and we're starting from the slot, then we're going to resist the impulse to overexert and overuse our hitting side and immediately start rotating aggressively, pronating our arm aggressively. All those things, we're resisting that. We're letting this process unwind. We're slowing it down in a sense. We're letting the body pull this arm, with the arm lagging the the racket head trailing the hand, not overtaking it right away, which is what most people do. Allowing this momentum to build out to the right initially. And we're gonna then get to the turn of the swing where our body is pivoting more towards the target, starting to slow down, if not stop down. Same with the chest, is starting to slow down and stop. And now this whole energy is wave-like passing into the arm in the unfurling stage and extension stage. And we're allowing this rotational swing to be this curved hand path around the body so that the racket at the right moment is going to square into contact and then continue. And again, to highlight the consistency element of this new paradigm, we're allowing the unfurling process to square the racket. And it's exactly the same process we have when we have an overhand throwing motion, baseball or football. So we have the rotational action of the body driving the arm. We're not arming the ball, we're letting the body drive the throw, and the elbow comes up and forward in the baseball throw. Chest is forward, but now it's stopped rotating, and now the arm is extending to reach its anatomical limit and release the ball, and then the hand pronates over in the release. It's exactly the same thing in football. And then we also have it more clearly illustrated to people in the serve, is that we're going to come up, let the body turn and rotate and swing up the racket, coming up on edge, elbow extension, and then as we reach our limit of our hand reach and the throwing motion, the forearm and the hand pronate over, and we end up with the server ending up in this position. It's just the natural result of this throwing action. It's harder to see in the topspin forehand and backhand because we're in an underhanded throwing action. But if you, now that you have that clearer in your mind, and you can see how, as I reach this stage in the swing, how naturally the hand in the release is going to pronate and carry through like this. And we don't have to manage it, it happens on its own. It's just harder to see in the topspin forehand and backhand, but it's the same release process that will automatically square the racket that we need to make the directional control of the ball to the target, but our arm will continue on this arcing path without any interruption and without any redirection or extension out to the target that so many people are advocating incorrectly. We essentially want a curving hand path because we have a curving arcing swing path. This is the correct motion of the swing path, this arcing hand and racket path, not this path. This path is only going to slow down the swing. The racket head will come at the same speed through contact. It will disrupt the point of contact. The head will tend to flip and scoop around on you, whereas this is held back at the last moment, and then only in the process of hitting is the ball squared to the target and then released to the target, and the hand continues. So we're at the end or near the end of our topspin forehand series. There'll still be other things rolled out over time, even some quick tips, believe it or not. It might even take only a minute to watch them instead of 45 minutes. But before we depart on today's lesson, I want you to remind you of what our sort of start of our lessons were all about. I said Go Tennis was about trying to let you fulfill your potential as an athlete and a tennis player. And I say those as two different things because I really, as I told you, most of my tennis career really wasn't fulfilling myself as an athlete. I was playing at a much lower level than I should have been playing had I really applied the kind of learning that we're applying. So it took me a long time to decide that good enough wasn't. And once I made the changeover and really started to pursue my potential, I was a lot happier with my game and myself, and I think over the long run you will be too. But I can't be critical if you're not there yet. I just encourage you to think about these things. So we get better by a better movement map, better principles, and better feels, and that's what I hope we've delivered in this series. I appreciate, again, some of the generous words and comments that have been posted and sent to me by email. Very much appreciate it. Thank you. So I think in this series, I have delivered, a better movement map for you for this topspin forehand, along with a lot of new principles and feels that over time that you can gradually master and understand at a deeper level. We never get to the ultimate level of understanding and skill. There's always more levels. They say in black belt, for example, is just the first level of black belt in martial arts. It just means that you're sort of qualified to study at a higher level, and it goes up to 10 levels of black belt beyond that. So we're never ever get to the top of the mountain. We're always students in this process. I do want to say I appreciate all of those of you who have taken the time and energy to see these videos, and particularly for those who have actually gone out and practiced a lot of these things. I just want to encourage you to continue on your journey, and for those who maybe still are sitting on the sidelines a little, I encourage you to think about getting off the sidelines and doing them a little bit more to fulfill your potential as an athlete and a tennis player. So there's a ton of detail in these videos, and I think it's important at the end to say what I've said before, which is, we really have to keep our eyes on the prize of what we're trying to accomplish and who we're trying to be. There are going to be challenges along the way, for sure. But since we have used Babe Ruth as our analogy, one of the greatest athletes and players of all time, I'll leave you what he said, is that he said, every strike brings me closer to the next home run. And I hope the same is true for you.